Okay, I'm thinking back to the last chapter of Ordinary Dogs, Extraordinary Friendships, and about that little curious polar bear in that last chapter. And it made me think of this book called If Polar Bears Disappeared, which brings to light a really serious problem that's happening up in northern Alaska and other parts of the Arctic regions. And that is the melting sea ice brought on by climate change. So this book was written by Lily Williams. And as you're listening, I really want you to pay attention to some of those cause and effects things that's happening in the story. So if this happened, then this happens next. If polar bears disappeared. Oh, and there they are, the aurora borealis. Those beautiful northern lights. If polar bears disappeared. This is the Arctic. It's an ecosystem in the far northern region of the globe. Few animals call this land home. The ones that do live here are strong, tough, slow, and ... sometimes hard to see. Oh, there's a word for that, isn't there, where an animal will blend right into its environment. You know that word, don't you? Of course, that's camouflage. Polar bears are believed to have descended from the common brown bear about 400,000 years ago. As brown bears moved farther and farther north, they evolved to fit their new environments. Over time, they became perfectly adapted to the icy Arctic tundra, using the sea ice in traveling, hunting, denning, and reproducing. Even their white fur is an adaptation to the snowy, treeless landscape. And they talked about that word tundra, which you remember is that the parts of the earth where it stays permanently frozen underneath that layer of soil. Although they're the apex predators in the frozen north, polar bears are still vulnerable to threats like pollution and habitat loss. But the biggest threat to polar bears and other animals in their ecosystem is the melting of sea ice because of climate change. If too much of the sea ice melted, think, what are some things that could happen? What do you think, Scruff? If too much melted, female bears couldn't get enough food to build the layer of fat they need before giving birth to cubs in their dens. Without enough food, polar bears would be weaker than they should be, and females would have fewer cubs. Some of the cubs wouldn't be healthy enough to survive. The lack of available food would also cause hungry polar bears to travel outside their natural habitat, forcing them to compete with other predators. These difficulties would cause the polar bear population to decline or go down, and before long, it could dwindle to none. So think, what are some of those effects that you heard just in that last section that could happen? Think. If too much of the sea ice melted, ... That's right, more to come. I wonder what are some more possible effects. Other Arctic species would be affected as well. If polar bears become extinct, the number of ringed seals, polar bears' main source of food, could initially rise. However, because ringed seals also rely on sea ice to mate, fish, rest, and give birth, they would struggle to adapt to the changing environment too. If too much of the sea ice melted, Ocean predators. Oh, now you remember that word, predators. Yes, those are going to be the ones that are doing the hunting. Ocean predators, like orcas, would be able to catch more seals, which would cause seal populations to decline or go down even further. With too few seals as prey, orcas could move south, disrupting the balance in the predator-prey relationship in those waters. Now, we talked about the word predator being those doing the hunting. Now remember, what's prey? Yeah, those are the ones that are being hunted or eventually being eaten as food. If the changes in the Arctic become irreversible, that means they can't go back to where they once were, even more species of plants and animals would be affected. If too much of the sea ice melted, the Arctic North would grow even warmer and the landscape would change permanently. And you know, permanently means for good. Shrubs that were once hidden under snow would be exposed and grow larger, crowding out the tundra's usual mosses and grasses. Many of these plant species that are not used to growing in this changing landscape could disappear, causing herbivores like caribou to struggle to find enough food. Without enough snow, mammals like lemmings who make their dens in the snow would lose their homes, exposing them to the harsh weather and predators and decreasing their populations. With many of the herbivores gone, non-apex predators, such as the snowy owl and Arctic fox, would be the next to lose their main food sources. Now, you've heard the word apex predator and non-apex predators. So an apex predator is going to be one of those at the very top of the food chain. For instance, the polar bear. That means they are going to eat many things at the top. But those smaller ones, for instance, the ones you're going to see down here, they're the non-apex. They would be more at the bottom parts of the food chain. Higher temperatures would also alter the reproductive patterns of insects, which in turn could disrupt the migration and breeding patterns of northern birds who eat those insects. Effects like these would begin in the Arctic and spread like a web into different environments. Snow stays cold because its white color reflects the heat of the sun, sending it right back out into space. Because bodies of water like the ocean are darker than snow and ice, they absorb the heat of the sun, which warms the water. Then, in a cycle, the warm water causes more sea ice to melt. This cycle could continue until all the sea ice has thawed. So think about some of the effects if all of that sea ice melted or thawed. Then neighboring ecosystems could change and their animals could disappear. This chain of event would roll onward, affecting all the different ecosystems, from the redwood forests to the hot deserts to the frozen Arctic, until ... What do you think would happen next? We are no longer able to stop it. They look stranded, don't they? Fortunately, we still have time to save polar bears and slow the loss of Arctic ice. Scientists and researchers are working hard to find solutions and educate the public about how ecosystems and organisms are connected to one another. The best way for you to help is to learn everything you can about climate change and how it affects environments like the Arctic. Taking action will lessen its devastating effects. And maybe we will find that the answer to saving the polar bears, ... What do you think the answer is? Has been right in front of us all along. What's the answer? Who's the answer? Are we the answer? Am I the answer? Are you the answer? And that is, if polar bears disappeared. Brought to you by my friend Scruff and Mrs. Drudy.